From the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, this is the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. We take questions from anyone in the dental profession and discuss what it takes to win not only in dentistry, but in life. Business, leadership, relationships, parenting, health and wellness, money management, nothing is off limits on the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. I'm Jason Tenori, your host, and have over 20 years of experience to pull from. Learn from my mistakes and let me help you collapse time so you can become the best version of yourself. Yo, Dr. Jason here, Dental Lighthouse Podcast. It is a chilly Monday morning in upstate New York. Just got done with my workout, took the dogs for a walk, and now I'm excited to spend some time with you. Again, this is more of a musings, a ramblings of some of the things that are relevant to me and that have been coming up on a regular basis with my one-on-one coaching clients and in our group coaching platform. So if it's important to them, it's important to me, and I ultimately think it'll be important to you. So what I want to talk about here is, where is your money going? All right. I think sometimes dentists don't worry enough about this because we're blessed to be in a profession that even if you're mediocre, and no judgment, right? I'm not pointing fingers. I was mediocre for a long period of time. Even if you're running things from a mediocre or complacent perspective or level, you're still making a good amount of money. And good can sometimes be the enemy to great. So I do think it makes sense to spend a few minutes unpacking, where is our money going? And I want to create, and I have created, I want to show you the framework that we've created with our one-on-one clients and our group coaching clients to make sure that they have absolute clarity with where their money's going, and more importantly, look at the data and help them decide what decisions they need to make based on real objective data, not based on feelings or subjectiveness or ambiguity or stuff like that. So if you're listening to this in your car, you're out on a run or a walk, that's great. I am going to also share this podcast on YouTube because I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go through a cash flow analysis spreadsheet that we've created for our Dental Lighthouse clients. Be more than happy to share this spreadsheet with you. Just reach out to us on our website, thedentallighthouse.com, and we'll send it to you. But the spreadsheet is intended to just leave no stone unturned so you have absolute clarity with what is going on in your business from a month-to-month basis. So I'm going to share my screen here now. Let's see where we're at. Bear with me because I'm not technologically savvy. There we go. Okay, so the first thing that we look at is money coming in. And if your collection percentage is at 100%, I think you should celebrate that. But more importantly, what I want you to think about is, did you collect what you projected to collect? So what do I mean by that? You should ultimately be collecting whatever your adjusted production is. But do you have clarity on what your adjusted production should be? So on this spreadsheet, we like to start it off with, okay, what was the total adjusted production for the month? What was the doctor adjusted production for the month? What was the hygiene adjusted production for the month? And most importantly, what was the projected adjusted production for the month? So let's just unpack that here for a few minutes. In terms of projected adjusted production, I would strongly encourage you to, either on a month-by-month basis or a quarter-by-quarter basis, lay out what your projected revenue or projected adjusted production should ultimately be. Now, how do you figure that out? Well, you basically take your hourly, or you could take your daily, you take your hygienist hourly or daily, and you extrapolate it over a month or over a quarter on the number of hours that you're going to work. So let's just do it for a month, okay? If your goal is $1,000 an hour in doctor adjusted production revenue, and you're working an 8-hour day, that's $8,000. If you work 4 days a week, that's $32,000. If your particular month has 4 weeks to it, that's 32,000 times four. Don't hold me to this, but 32,000 times four is 120, another 12, another 16. That's $136,000. So your doctor adjusted production number, projected number should be $146,000. Awesome. Do the same thing with hygiene. Okay, if you have one hygienist, two hygienists, if you have an associate, do the same thing with that. So now you know what you're projected to do. Now, if you actually do what you were projected to do, then high fives all around. Let's celebrate that. And then let's make sure that we collect that. But what if you were projected to do $200,000 as an office and you did 175? That's data. That's a real number. We don't just dismiss that and we don't just say, oh, I'll be better next time. We dig into that and we say, what went wrong? What happened here that has me experiencing a $25,000 delta between what I projected we were going to do and what we actually did? Now, it could be a very black and white answer. Could be that you had an associate that you had projected would do X amount of dollars and they were sick. It could be that a hygienist went on maternity leave. It could be any number of things that are like, oh, okay, I get that. But what if it's not? What if everyone that was supposed to work showed up and you still have this gross discrepancy? Then you have to start to unpack things, and probably a podcast for another day. But some of the questions that you need to be asking yourself is, which provider didn't hit their projected number? Why did they not hit it? Was it an issue that's in their control, or was it an issue that's not in their control? Issues that are not in their control, things like um, failed appointments, maybe the front desk wasn't grabbing deposits, maybe a confirmation process wasn't followed. Okay, that's an opportunity now. If we're identifying that as the issue, let's fix that. If it were things that were in their control, some of the things that are in their control, did they treatment plan enough dentistry? Did they get enough close? Enough? Is their case acceptance high enough? Were they seeing enough new patients? All of these things. So again, we've created podcasts before that take a deep dive into that, but the first thing that we want to look at when we look at this cash flow analysis is incoming revenue. Again, is our collection rate close to 100%? But more importantly, from my perspective, did we meet our projected adjusted production? One final note on this. When we're talking about ratios of hygiene to doctor, as a general rule, now don't quote me on this, but as a general rule, for every $1,000 that an office is bringing in, I would love 700 of it to come from the doctor and 300 of it to come from hygiene. So a 70-30 split. Now, in some practices, it's going to be 75-25. In some practices, it's going to be 65-35. So just decide what fits well for your practice. The only time that this ratio is really skewed is if you have a super producer, typically one of these founder unicorn docs that are doing $20,000 a day and only have one or two hygienists. And obviously the ratio is going to be off, but you have an explanation for that. So that's what we look at first when we talk about incoming revenue. The next thing we look at is expenses. And then there's lots of different ways to categorize expenses. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. From my perspective, there's just a simple way. And this spreadsheet will ultimately unpack for you guys what is simple. So at first we talk about salaries, and I break up salaries in the front office, hygienist, associate, and assistant. Within those wages, we talk about payroll expenses and staff benefits, right? Couple things that I want you to consider here. You need to have a goal for each line item. And the spreadsheet that I'll share with you does have a goal for each particular line item. The spreadsheet that I'll share with you, if you're interested in it, has an ultimate profitability goal of 20%. Now, some of you guys may say 20%, that's too high, that's too low. It is, this is for what we're trying to do in our coaching program. We're striving for 20% profitability. So for every $100,000 you bring in, 20,000 of that should be pure profit. And again, as we get a little bit further into this cash flow analysis, we'll talk about where all that money goes. So again, first thing is salaries. So what percentage of your revenue is dedicated towards your front office? What percentage is dedicated towards hygienists, towards associates, towards assistants? The one thing that always my owners struggle with is where do they put their own compensation as a provider? Now, I'm not going to put my accounting hat on and say that you should be W-2ing yourself as an associate. But what I will share with you is when you're doing your deep work CEO time, and this is when you should be doing this. You should be poring over this analysis, poring over your profit and loss statement during monthly deep work time when you're wearing your CEO hat. When you're doing this, I would strongly encourage you to have a line item under compensation that is for you as a provider. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, I don't really need to do that. All the money's going towards me anyways. And I would agree with that. But if you're truly trying to see if you're running a successful business versus you're just a cog in the wheel, then you need to do this. So, as a general rule, we dedicate 23% of revenue to associates. And if you can put your own production and your own compensation in that line item, and it still ends up around 23%, then you're in a really, really good place. That if you don't run it this way, you don't know. And information is power. So you need to understand what's going on here. In this spreadsheet, there is a budget next to every line item. Now, these budgetary percentages are based on what I would call a successfully run practice. If you request this spreadsheet and you see these percentages, I repeat, I do not want you to adopt these percentages right away. What I would love for you to do is take your 2024 numbers, see where you were at. If you did very, very well, and by well, I mean you were at 20% profitability or more, then keep the same percentages. But if you were not, then I would say, okay, we know we need to tweak our budgetary percentages for each line item, but we also know that if we completely change the budgetary number to what Jason has on his spreadsheet versus what we had in 2024, that might be a goal that's unreachable. So we need to find somewhere in the middle. So again, just to make sure that I'm explaining this correctly, we dedicate 5% of revenue to our front office staff. That's treatment coordinator, that's office manager, that's whoever's at the front. Okay. Now, if you look at your 2024 numbers and you realize that you dedicated 12% of revenue to your front office staff, if you all of a sudden go from 12% to a goal of 5%, you're setting yourself up for failure. You will not attain that. But if you realize that you need to get closer to 5%, then I would pick a number in the middle for, say, the first or second quarter. Maybe the goal is to go from 12% to 9%. And then you do everything you can to get to that number. And then in the second or third quarter, you get closer and closer to that 5% number. Same thing with hygienists, same thing with assistants, same thing with every position. So again, once you can see, like either via YouTube video or if you download the cash flow, the Dental Lighthouse cash flow analysis from the website, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about here in terms of the goal numbers. So let's assume that each of these first few line items is in line. You're like, all right, front office is in line, hygienist is in line, associates is in line, assistants, payroll expenses, blah, blah, blah. The next thing we get down to is dental supplies. What percentage of your revenue is going towards dental supplies? We strive for 4.5% to 5%. What were you at in 2024? If you were at 4.5% to 5%, high fives all around. If you were at 10%, you may want to consider digging deep into this system and figuring out how we can cut a few percentage points off of that. Now, one of the questions that are comments that I always get is, well, where do you classify this or where do you classify that? And I get where you're coming from. Dental implants, bone grafting, CEREC blocks, all of these things. A general rule of thumb is I'm not going to tell you where to classify all this stuff, but it's basically going to be classified either under dental supplies or under lab supplies. There's really no other place that this stuff can be classified at, right? So if you're, again, looking at this cash flow analysis, our dental supply budgetary goal is 5%. Our lab supply budgetary goal is 6%. So no matter where you put this stuff, it should ultimately equal 11% or less for us, for how we run things. Okay. Now, what were your 2024 numbers? If your dental supply expense was 8 and your lab supply expense was 10, that's 18% total. That's a lot. Now, if you were able to absorb that 18% total and still have 20% profitability, then don't change anything. But if you're not even close to 20% profitability and you have an 18% total for lab and dental, you need to make some changes. Now, again, am I suggesting you go from 18% for those two line items to 11%, which is where I'm at? No. But I do think that you could find some place in the middle. We're going to go from 18% to 15%. We're going to go from 16% to 13%. Set yourself up with a goal that's going to stretch you, but it's not going to overwhelm you. And then as you go through the rest of this cash flow analysis, again, office expenses, professional, legal, consulting, marketing, facility, all of these things. Now, what you'll notice in this spreadsheet too is down here, we have a chart of accounts tab. And the chart of accounts tab is just meant to make sure that we're all playing by the same rules. So when I click on the chart of accounts tab, you can see salaries, you can see payroll expenses, you can see dental supplies, you can see lab expenses, and you put underneath each one of these what is underneath there. So for example, under our office expenses, we have obviously office supplies, which includes pens, paper, printer ink, but it's also our cleaning service. It's also computer software. Under professional and legal, we have our HR expenses, we have our job postings, we have our consulting services, my accounting services, my lawyer fees, all of those things, right? So have absolute clarity with what's going in each category. So then you ultimately get to the net profitability number. Remember, so you bring in a certain amount of money. In this particular case, let's say $100,000. You dole out money because you have to pay your front desk, you have to pay hygienists, you have to pay associates, you have to pay dental supplies, lab supplies, lawyer fees, accounting fees, all of these things. In my opinion, a well-run, healthy practice after all of those expenses is 20%. So there should be $20,000 left at the end of the month. Now, what do you do with this $20,000? Do you just take it and blow it in Vegas over 3 days? No, because it's not really your $20,000. What you then need to do, if you're running things the right way, in my opinion, is you need to take that $20,000 and you need to divide it up into buckets. I have 4 buckets that I want you to consider. The first is a projected tax payment. The next is debt. The next is savings, emergency fund, rainy day fund, capital expenditure fund, whatever you want to call it. But in my world, we're just going to call it savings. And then the fourth and final bucket is owner distribution. Okay. So let's go through each one of those buckets. And remember, we have $20,000. What are we going to do with it? I would strongly encourage you to take 25% of your profits, or 25%, in this case, $20,000, and wire it to an account, ideally in a different bank. So out of sight, out of mind, for projected taxes. So 25%, in my opinion, is a conservative number, especially if you're working with an accountant that really understands tax strategy. So 25% of $20,000 is $5,000. So boom, right off the bat, we're taking $5,000 and we're sending it to an account for a projected tax payment. The next line item is debt. How much debt do you have on the practice? Equipment, and if you purchase the practice, those types of things. It's not real estate debt. Your real estate debt should be covered in your facility expense line item. You should. And again, I'm not an accountant, but if I was, I would be telling you to have an LLC that owns the property that you're in, if you own the building, that owns the building, and then you're paying rent to your LLC. Okay. Conversation for another day. But when I'm talking about debt bucket, I'm talking about whatever your debt payment is for equipment and whatever your debt payment is if you purchased the practice through an acquisition, if you made a bunch of improvements, stuff like that. The next bucket is savings. Well, how much money do we put into savings? Well, this comes down to what your philosophy is. In our organization, we love to pay cash for things. So with that philosophy, we need to save more. So we pump money into our savings account, our rainy day account, in an effort to ultimately get it to the point where it's about 4 weeks of expenses. So let me unpack that a little bit. If you did $100,000 this month and 20,000 was profit, that means 80,000 was expenses. I would want an account, a savings account that has at least $80,000 in it. Now, in my world, I would strive for it to be more, let's say 2 months or 3 months of expenses, but at a absolute minimum, I would want you to have 1 month of expenses in this savings account. So this is not going to happen in 1 month, obviously. So you need to slowly but surely put money into this savings account to where you first get to the point where you have 1 month of expenses covered, and then you build off of that. It's classic Dave Ramsey where he talks, I think it's baby step, either 1 or 2, to be honest with you, where you have $1,000 emergency fund, right? Do that first. So same exact principle. And then whatever's left is for an owner's distribution. Now, with that money, you can do whatever you want. You can take that money to Vegas. You can decide to put more money in your savings. You can put more money into debt. If you have partners, then you distribute distributions to the partners, ... So again, I just covered a lot here. And if you're just hearing this, it's hard to really totally understand what I'm talking about here. So again, I would encourage you to watch the video. This, we'll put it on our YouTube page. I would encourage you to reach out to us at dentallighthouse.com and get a copy of this cash flow analysis. And this is one of those things that CEOs, i.e. you, when you're not at the chair, should be doing on a monthly basis. You should be taking the P&L from your accountant. You should be translating that P&L into this cash flow analysis, and you should have absolute clarity with what you're spending on at each line item. And then once you have profitability, where that profit is going. You should also, from a top line perspective, have absolute clarity with what your projected adjusted production was, what percentage of that is coming from the doctor versus what percentage of that is coming from the hygiene department, and then what your actual adjusted production was, and what your collection rate was off of that actual adjusted production. This is a very, very clear and concise way to have absolute clarity with how a dollar flows through your practice on a month-to-month basis. That's it, guys. Hopefully this resonates with you. If you had any specific questions about that, this should clear it up. I'm always available. If you guys have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to me and we can get on a podcast interview and we can unpack your specific situation. If you have any interest in coaching, feel free to reach out to me. We could schedule a discovery call and I can just be 100% honest with you and let you know kind of where you're at and how I might be able to help you. But please reach out if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you for listening. Appreciate you. Have an awesome day.
Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. You have a choice today. Choose to be a lighthouse. Lighthouses are powerful and steadfast. They are beacons of light for others to reference when life gets turbulent. Go out into the world today and become a lighthouse for someone. Give more than you get. True joy comes from serving others. Start today. I'm Jason Tenori, your host. Thank you for listening to the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. For more information, podcast show notes, or links to anything that we have discussed today, please check out our website, thedentallighthouse.com. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to get on the show, please email us at podcast@thedentallighthouse.com.